He invited his poor ex-wife to the wedding for one clear reason. So she would stand there, surrounded by success, and finally understand how small she had become in his world. What never crossed his mind was seeing her step out of a private limousine, carrying a truth that would shut the entire room down. No whispers. No laughter. Just silence. The wedding hall looked unreal, almost like a movie set. Warm lights washed over everything, every detail carefully chosen to scream status and success. Guests walked in wearing confidence stitched into designer fabric, laughing easily. Glasses clinking like this was the ultimate win. For him it was a big deal. Proof that he had leveled up and left his past where it belonged. Outside the entrance I stood still. That invitation was never about closure. It was a calculated move. He wanted me there so I could see what I lost. So others could quietly confirm what they already believed. The message did not need words. This is what winning looks like, and you did not make the cut. I steadied myself. Each step toward those doors felt heavier than the last. Inside were people who had already written the ending to my story. In their eyes I was the failed ex-wife. The woman who could not hold a marriage together. The one whose life faded while his kept climbing. What they did not know was simple. I was not there to explain anything. I was not there to defend myself. I was there because the truth could no longer stay hidden. Music drifted out through the doors, light and cheerful, completely unaware of what it was about to collide with. I could already picture the looks. Polite smiles mixed with quiet judgment. That subtle pity people wear when they think they are above you. This was exactly what he wanted. He was confident, certain, convinced that this moment would end with my humiliation. That certainty almost made me smile. Over the years I learned something important. When people think you have nothing left, they get careless. They say things they would never say otherwise. They show you who they really are, believing there will never be consequences. Tonight, that belief was about to crack. A few feet away, a black limousine waited, calm and unmistakably out of place. It did not belong to his plan. It belonged to mine. Inside it sat the life he never knew existed. The life that would turn his victory into a reckoning. The doors were about to open. Once I stepped inside, the story would no longer be his to control. Every assumption, every quiet insult, every hidden intention would surface without noise, without anger. This was not rage-driven revenge. This was truth showing up on time. And once it did, his perfect wedding would never feel perfect again. The doors opened slowly, and the sound of the music softened as I stepped inside. The shift in the room was instant. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Laughter lost its rhythm. Even the air felt heavier, like everyone sensed something had changed but could not explain why. I felt dozens of eyes land on me at once, some curious, others already decided. I walked forward anyway. He stood near the center of the hall, relaxed, confident, exactly where someone stands when they believe the moment belongs to them. For half a second, his expression flickered. Not fear. Not shock. Something closer to surprise. Then it disappeared, replaced by a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. People made space as I passed, not intentionally but instinctively. It was subtle, almost polite, yet impossible to miss. Dresses brushed against chairs. A man cleared his throat and looked away. Someone near the aisle whispered my name like it was a rumor rather than a person. The silence stretched. I could feel the judgment settling in layers. They were comparing without saying it out loud. His tailored suit. My calm presence. His spotlight. My timing. In their minds, the verdict was already written, and it was not in my favor. Near the front row, a woman offered a tight smile, the kind people use when they want credit for being civil. Another guest nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a risk taken by showing up at all. No one asked how I was. No one needed to. Their faces said enough. He finally took a step toward me, measured and controlled, like this was still his stage. The confidence was there, but something underneath it felt off. He had expected discomfort. He had expected hesitation. What he did not expect was composure. I returned his look without rushing, without shrinking. That seemed to bother him. Behind him, I noticed small details most people miss when they are busy performing. A bridesmaid paused mid-adjustment. A groomsman checked his phone, then looked up again, confused. Someone at the back turned to see the entrance, as if waiting for something else to happen. They did not know why they were uneasy. Neither did he. I took another step forward and stopped just short of where the light was brightest. Standing there felt deliberate, visible, impossible to ignore. The whispers did not return. Instead, an uncomfortable stillness settled in, the kind that makes people aware of their own thoughts. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had invited me to be a reminder of his past. What he created instead was a moment no one could look away from. And as I stood there, surrounded by expectations that no longer fit, I realized something quietly powerful. They were watching me now. Not out of pity, out of uncertainty. And that was only the beginning. To them I was never complicated. I was the woman who married young, loved deeply, and somehow ended up on the wrong side of the story. The one people referenced quietly, usually followed by a pause or a lowered voice, as if my name carried a lesson they did not want to explain out loud. In their version I was fragile. Not weak in an obvious way, but soft enough to overlook. The kind of person people assumed would always be fine because she did not demand attention. I listened more than I spoke. I adjusted instead of arguing. I learned early how to take up less space in rooms that were not built for me. When the marriage ended, their assumptions hardened. They believed I had failed at the one thing that mattered. That belief became the lens through which they viewed every part of my life. My choices, my silence, even my distance. To them I did not leave to heal. I faded because I could not keep up. I let them believe that. Not because it was true, but because correcting people who already made up their minds is exhausting. Sometimes it is easier to carry a label than to fight one. What they never saw were the nights I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations that ended too soon. They did not see the mornings when getting out of bed felt heavier than it should have. They did not see the quiet resolve forming beneath the disappointment. I learned to function without applause. I learned to show up even when no one expected much from me. That kind of survival changes you. It strips away the need to impress and replaces it with something steadier. Something real. To him, I was a chapter he believed he closed. A past mistake neatly boxed and set aside so he could move forward without guilt. He told himself he outgrew me. That he evolved while I stayed the same. That narrative made his choices easier to live with. It also made tonight possible. Standing there under the same lights meant to celebrate his future. I could feel the weight of who they thought I was pressing against me. The failed ex-wife. The quiet one. The woman who would surely arrive nervous, uncertain, grateful for any acknowledgement. That expectation hung in the air. What none of them realized was how much strength it takes to remain calm when people underestimate you. How much restraint it takes to stay kind when you are misunderstood. There is a difference between being invisible and choosing not to explain yourself. I was not there to rewrite their opinions. I was there to stand as I was. Grounded. Clear. Unapologetic. They thought they knew me because they knew my ending. They never bothered to ask what came after. And as I met their eyes one by one, I understood something that settled deep in my chest. The version of me they remembered no longer existed. They celebrated him like the room had been built for that purpose alone. Every glance drifted back to where he stood, effortless and assured, accepting admiration as if it were a natural extension of who he was. Laughter followed him. Compliments landed easily. People leaned in when he spoke, the way they do when they believe someone is worth listening to. This was his moment. Everyone knew it. He was the one who made it. The one whose choices paid off. The proof that leaving the past behind had been the right call. In their eyes, his success justified everything that came before it, including the way the marriage ended. They admired the results, not the cost. Someone clapped him on the shoulder and joked about how far he had come. Another guest mentioned his career with a tone that carried approval and envy at the same time. Words like impressive and well played floated through the air, wrapped in easy smiles. He soaked it in. Standing there, I watched the dynamic unfold with quiet clarity. He did not need to ask for validation. It was handed to him freely, reinforced by every approving nod. The message was consistent and unspoken. This is what winning looks like. The contrast was sharp. Where he was praised for ambition, I had been remembered for restraint. Where he was admired for confidence, I had been dismissed as passive. Their version of the story had room for only one success, and it belonged to him. Favoritism does not always announce itself. Sometimes it lives in tone, in attention, in who people assume deserves grace and who does not. Tonight it was everywhere. In the way conversations paused for him but continued around me. In how his future was discussed with excitement, while my presence was treated like a footnote. I noticed it in the small things. When he spoke, people smiled without effort. When I stood quietly, they watched with caution. He was celebrated for becoming more. I was quietly measured for becoming less. Jealousy was not what stirred inside me. What I felt was recognition. I recognized how easily narratives form when people want a simple story. A hero. A cautionary tale. A winner. A failure. It makes things neat. Comfortable. Easy to digest. He fit their preferred version perfectly. The golden child. The upgrade. The proof that moving on was a smart move. No one questioned whether the story was complete. No one asked what had been left behind to make it work. As applause rose again, I remained still, letting the moment pass without interruption. There was no need to compete for attention that was already claimed. What mattered was not how loudly he was celebrated, but how confidently he believed the celebration was deserved. That belief shaped everything. And as I watched him bask in it, I understood something quietly important. When people put someone on a pedestal, they stop looking closely. They stop asking questions. They stop noticing what does not quite add up. That blind spot would matter later. For now, the golden child shined under the lights, unaware that admiration built on assumption has a way of cracking when truth finally steps into view. There was a time when none of this existed. No spotlight. No hierarchy. No quiet scorekeeping. Back then, we were just two people trying to figure life out without an audience watching. Success had not yet become a measuring stick, and love did not feel like a competition. We met before ambition took over everything. He laughed more easily then. I remember that clearly. Not the polished smile he wore now, but the unguarded kind that showed up when nothing needed proving. We talked about simple things. Late dinners. Shared plans that felt big only because they belonged to us. I believed in him without conditions. When he doubted himself, I was steady. When opportunities felt out of reach, I reminded him why they were not. I celebrated small wins because they mattered to him, even when no one else noticed. At the time, that felt normal. That felt like partnership. Respect came naturally. Not because of titles or outcomes, but because we listened to each other. Decisions were made together. Mistakes were owned without blame. We built routines that felt like home, even when the future was uncertain. Then things shifted. It did not happen all at once. It never does. The change came quietly, disguised as progress. New goals. Longer hours. A growing need to be seen. Each step forward pulled him slightly further away from the version of us that existed before. I adapted. I always did. I told myself it was temporary. That success required sacrifice. That understanding was part of love. But with each adjustment I made, something else faded. Conversations shortened. Patience thinned. The balance we once shared tilted without correction. Respect was the first thing to go. Not openly. Not dramatically. It slipped away in tone and timing. In how my opinions were considered optional. In how my support became expected rather than valued. Somewhere along the way, being dependable turned into being invisible. I noticed it before anyone else did. The way he spoke about his future stopped including me. The way decisions were announced instead of discussed. The way praise from others mattered more than quiet understanding at home. That was when I realized something important had already been lost. The respect we built did not disappear because I failed. It disappeared because success changed how he measured worth. By the time the marriage ended, the foundation was already cracked. The separation only made it visible. People assumed the story was simple. That love was not enough. That I could not keep up. What they never considered was how much I had already given up trying to make things work. Standing in that wedding hall now, I could see the contrast clearly. The man being celebrated was not the one I first believed in. And the woman they dismissed was not the one who stayed silent because she had nothing to say. She stayed silent because she had learned. Learned that respect lost quietly does not return loudly. Learned that being underestimated comes with its own kind of freedom. The past they remembered was incomplete. And the past they forgot was about to matter more than they ever expected. Started small the way it always does. A smile that arrived a second too late. A greeting delivered with careful distance, like courtesy was an obligation rather than a choice. Someone near the aisle leaned toward another guest and whispered something while glancing in my direction, then quickly looked away when our eyes almost met. Nothing openly rude. Nothing that could be called out. That was the point. A woman I barely recognized stepped forward and gave a light laugh, her tone casual, almost friendly. "I was not sure you would come," she said, eyes scanning me in a way that felt more like inventory than curiosity. Weddings like this can feel overwhelming. Overwhelming. The word hung between us, wrapped in concern that did not feel genuine. I nodded calmly, offering a neutral response. She smiled again, satisfied, as if that single word confirmed whatever assumption she had already made. Nearby, another guest chimed in, voice bright. "It must be nice to see how far he has come. Life really works out when you stay focused, right?" The emphasis was subtle, but the message landed clearly enough. Focused people succeed. Others fall behind. I noticed how they spoke around me, not to me. Comments floated just close enough to hear, just far enough to avoid responsibility. Someone mentioned how strong relationships require ambition on both sides. Another joked about timing and how some people simply miss their moment. Low-key judgment dressed up as conversation. I stood there listening, feeling the weight of it pressed gently but persistently. This was the humiliation he expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to remind me of where they believed I belonged. He watched from a distance. I caught the brief glance he sent my way, quick and assessing, as if checking whether the message had landed. When our eyes met, his expression did not change. Calm, confident, certain that everything was unfolding exactly as planned. That certainty was almost impressive. Someone offered to take my coat, then hesitated, scanning the room as if unsure where it should go. Another guest suggested I grab a seat near the back, phrasing it like a helpful tip rather than a direction. Each interaction carried the same undertone. Stay out of the way. I did. Not because I felt small, but because I was paying attention. There is a specific kind of cruelty that hides behind politeness. It relies on tone, timing, and the shared understanding that no one will interrupt it. It assumes silence means agreement. I remained composed, offering brief replies, neutral expressions, no visible reaction. That restraint confused them. A few exchanged glances, unsure why I did not seem uncomfortable enough. They expected shrinking. They expected gratitude for basic civility. What they did not expect was stillness. And as the comments continued, subtle and carefully placed, I realized this was only the opening act. The real test had not started yet. This was just them warming up, confident that I would not push back. They were wrong. Politeness only lasts as long as it feels effective. Once they realized I was not shrinking the way they expected, the tone shifted. Still calm on the surface but sharper underneath. The comments became more specific, more personal, less careful. A man I vaguely remembered from years ago stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was offering advice. "It takes courage to show up after everything," he said, nodding slowly. "Not everyone can handle seeing what they walked away from." Walked away from. The assumption slipped out easily, like it had been rehearsed. I thanked him and moved on, but the tension followed me. It always does when people decide your silence gives them permission. Near the drinks table, two women spoke just loudly enough to be heard. One mentioned how weddings are milestones that really show who grew and who stayed stuck. The other laughed softly and replied that timing matters, and not everyone keeps up with life's pace. They did not look at me when they said it. They did not need to. The comments landed heavier now because they were no longer abstract. They were targeted, measured, designed to sting without leaving fingerprints. Each sentence was wrapped in reason, logic, and that familiar tone people use when they think they are being helpful. He joined a nearby conversation, making sure his voice carried. Someone congratulated him again, and he responded with practiced ease. "It took focus," he said, letting go of things that were holding me back. Holding me back. The words settled into the room like smoke. A few guests glanced at me instinctively, curiosity flickering across their faces. They were connecting dots that did not belong together, building a story that made sense only because it was easy. My chest tightened, not from hurt but from clarity. This was intentional. The escalation was not accidental. He wanted the contrast sharper. Wanted me positioned clearly on the losing side of the narrative. Each comment pushed the line a little further, testing how much I would tolerate. Someone asked me with a smile that felt too bright, whether I was seeing anyone now. Before I could answer, another voice jumped in. She is probably focused on herself right now, they said kindly. Healing takes time. Healing. A word used when people believe you are broken. I felt the shift inside me then. Not anger. Not sadness. Something steadier. A quiet recognition that the night was unfolding exactly as it needed to. Every assumption, every unnecessary remark, every casual dismissal was stacking up. They thought they were winning. They thought pressure would make me crack or retreat. That embarrassment would keep me quiet. That discomfort would push me toward the exit before anything became awkward for them. Instead, I stayed. I met their eyes. I answered when spoken to. I moved through the room with intention, not haste. That seemed to frustrate them more than any response could have. Escalation has a way of revealing motive. And by now the motive was clear. This was not about celebration. It was about control. About reminding me where they believed I belonged. What they did not realize was how close they were to pushing this beyond their control. Because once people go too far, they stop being careful. And when that happens, truth does not need permission to enter the room. I did not mean to hear it. That was the thing about truth. It rarely announces itself. It slips in quietly when people assume you are no longer listening. I had stepped toward the hallway near the restrooms, needing a moment away from the noise, when their voices carried through the open door of a side room. The music masked just enough sound to make them careless. They spoke freely, confident that privacy was on their side. He invited her on purpose, a woman said, her tone sharp with certainty. This was always part of the plan. Another voice answered lower, almost amused. Of course it was. You do not bring an ex to a wedding unless you want to make a point. I froze. My name came next, spoken casually like a topic already settled. They talked about me the way people discuss an inconvenience. Something to manage. Something to put in its place. He wants closure, someone said, though there was no kindness in the word. He thinks seeing everything tonight will finally make it sink in for her. Sink in. Another voice laughed softly. More like remind her. Reality check. Some people need that. My fingers tightened against the edge of the wall. Then came the part that changed everything. He told me he hoped she would come alone, the woman continued. Quiet. Uncomfortable. Just enough so people would see the contrast. It makes the story cleaner. Cleaner. As if my presence was a prop. As if my discomfort was part of the decor. They talked about how awkward it must be for me. How hard it would be to stand there while he moved on publicly. Someone mentioned that this kind of exposure can be good for people who need motivation. Another suggested that embarrassment builds character. No one questioned it. No one pushed back. I stood there, heart steady, the pieces sliding into place. This was not accidental cruelty. This was coordinated. Thought out. Designed to feel polite while cutting deep. The emotional threat was clear now. He did not just want me present. He wanted me diminished. Visible enough to be compared. Silent enough to be controlled. Tonight was not about celebration. It was about closing a chapter on his terms. I stepped back before they noticed me. The hallway felt colder as I returned to the main room. The laughter sounded louder now, sharper around the edges. Every smile felt staged. Every compliment felt rehearsed. They believed they were in control. They believed they understood the narrative. What they did not know was that I had just learned how far they were willing to go. And once a plan like that is exposed, it loses its power. The stakes were no longer emotional. They were personal. And whatever happened next would not follow their script. It happened when I least expected it, which was exactly the point. He raised his glass lightly, just enough to draw attention without appearing dramatic. The room responded instantly. Conversations faded. Faces turned. Smiles settled into place, ready for whatever came next. This was supposed to be a warm moment, a thoughtful gesture, something that looked generous on the surface. He spoke calmly, confidently. I just want to say something quickly. He began, voice steady, practiced. Tonight is about moving forward. but it is also about acknowledging where we came from. A few people nodded, already impressed. Then his eyes found me. I know it cannot be easy being here, he continued, tone softened deliberately. And I respect the courage it takes to show up, even when life has not turned out the way you hoped. The room held its breath. I felt the shift immediately. This was not concern. This was positioning. He was framing the narrative in real time, placing himself above it while making me part of the lesson. I just want you to know, he added, that there is no shame in starting over. Sometimes people need support, direction, even guidance to get back on track. Support. Guidance. The words sounded kind. The intention did not. A woman near the front smiled sympathetically, turning slightly toward me like she was watching something fragile. Someone else murmured agreement. Another nodded slowly, as if this was a thoughtful, mature moment. He went on, suggesting resources, connections, opportunities. He mentioned how people can lose their way and how important it is to accept help when it is offered. Each sentence landed like a quiet correction, reinforcing the same idea. I was behind and he was being generous by acknowledging it. All eyes were on me now. Not with curiosity, with judgment wrapped in concern. I stood still, aware of every second stretching longer than it should have. This was the low point he had planned. The public moment designed to seal the story. The part where I was expected to nod, smile politely, maybe even thank him for his thoughtfulness. That reaction would have completed it. Instead, I met his gaze calmly. I did not interrupt. I did not explain. I did not react the way he needed me to. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Not for me but for everyone else. He hesitated just slightly, as if waiting for a response that never came. The confidence wavered for the first time. People shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. What was meant to feel generous now felt exposed. The help sounded less like support and more like a public assessment. A performance dressed up as kindness. I gave a small nod, nothing more. That single gesture changed the energy in the room. It did not validate him. It did not reject him either. It simply refused to play the role he assigned me. And in that moment I realized something important. Humiliation only works when the other person accepts the script. I had not. What he believed would be the end of the story was only the moment it slipped out of his control. Something settled inside me after that. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Relief. For the first time that night, I understood exactly where I stood. Not in the room, not in their eyes, but within myself. The pressure to clarify, to soften the moment, to reassure everyone that I was fine finally dissolved. I did not owe anyone comfort. I had spent years explaining myself in small ways. Explaining why I stayed quiet. Why I did not correct assumptions. Why my life looked different from what they expected. Every explanation had been an attempt to earn understanding from people who never asked for it. Standing there under the weight of their attention, I realized how exhausting that habit had been. I stopped. The room buzzed again, cautiously this time. As if people were unsure whether it was safe to resume normal conversation. I could feel it in their glances. They were waiting for something. A reaction. A clarification. A sign that their version of the story still held. I gave them nothing. I turned slightly away from him, not dramatically, just enough to reclaim my space. My posture relaxed. My breathing slowed. The shift was subtle, but it mattered. When you stop explaining, people feel it before they understand it. He noticed. His eyes followed me, searching for a crack. A sign that the moment had landed the way he wanted. Instead, he found composure. That unsettled him more than any argument could have. I moved toward the edge of the room, not to retreat but to observe. Conversations sounded different now. Less confident. More cautious. A few guests glanced between us, clearly sensing that something had changed even if they could not name it. I felt grounded. Not because I suddenly became powerful, but because I had stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. That decision stripped their words of influence. It gave me something steadier than approval. Clarity. This was the turning point. I knew then that whatever happened next did not require defense or explanation. The truth, when it arrived, would speak for itself. Until then, silence was not weakness. It was restraint. I caught my reflection briefly in the glass near the side wall. My expression surprised me. Calm. Focused. Unbothered. Not the face of someone losing control, but of someone who had already reclaimed it. That was when I understood the real shift had already happened. Not in the room. Not in his confidence. Not in their judgment. It happened the moment I stopped trying to manage how they saw me. From that point on, nothing they said could move me the way it once did. And nothing they planned would land the way they expected. Because when you stop explaining, you stop participating in the illusion. And the illusion was about to collapse on its own. The shift began quietly, almost casually. I was standing near the side of the room when a familiar name floated into the conversation behind me. First I thought I misheard it. Then someone repeated it, louder this time with clear admiration in their voice. "That company is on another level," a man said. "Smart leadership. Solid values. They do not just chase money. They build things that last." Others agreed instantly. People leaned in, suddenly animated, trading details like insiders. Someone mentioned growth numbers. Another praised the way the company treated its people. A woman nearby said she admired how the leadership stayed private, focused on impact rather than attention. I stayed still. They were talking about it like it was a gold standard. Something rare. Something respectable. A benchmark for doing things the right way in a world that often cuts corners. And they had no idea. "He actually mentioned them as inspiration," someone added, nodding toward him. Said he admired how that company handled expansion without losing integrity. Integrity. The word landed heavier than the rest. He smiled modestly when the compliment reached him, playing it cool, like he always did when praise felt deserved. "They run a tight operation," he said. "You can tell when leadership knows what they are doing." I felt the irony settle slowly. They praised the strategy. They admired the discipline. They respected the restraint. Everything they admired was built by the same person they had just tried to diminish. The contrast was almost unreal. Someone else jumped in, mentioning a potential collaboration. "If you are connected to them in any way, that is a big deal," they said. "People like that do not associate with just anyone." I watched faces light up at the idea. Interest replaced judgment. Respect replaced curiosity. The room leaned toward possibility, all because of a name they associated with power and credibility. No one looked at me. That was the strange part. They spoke about my work with enthusiasm, dissecting decisions I had made, praising choices I remembered agonizing over late at night. They admired outcomes without realizing they were standing next to the person responsible for them. The suspense tightened. I could feel it in my chest, not as excitement but as awareness. The story was folding in on itself. Every compliment built tension. Every detail they celebrated sharpened the contrast between who they thought mattered and who actually did. He nodded along, clearly pleased to be aligned with something impressive, unaware of how close he stood to the truth. The confidence returned to his posture. He looked comfortable again, grounded in admiration that did not yet threaten him. I let it happen. There was no rush. Sometimes the most powerful moment is not the reveal itself, but the space just before it. The moment when people unknowingly speak their truth out loud. When admiration is honest. When respect is unfiltered. They were praising what I owned. And they were doing it with absolute certainty. That certainty would not last much longer. Because once truth enters a conversation like this, it does not interrupt. It rearranges everything. And the room was already perfectly positioned for that shift. The energy in the room shifted again, this time with purpose. Plans began forming out loud, casually at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Someone suggested a meeting. Another mentioned how connections like that do not appear often. The idea gained momentum quickly, fueled by excitement and opportunity. He leaned into it. "There might be a chance to talk," he said, measured and confident. "Nothing formal yet, but there is interest. People like to see alignment before they commit." Alignment. The word echoed as heads nodded in approval. A few guests exchanged looks that said this was more than conversation now. This was potential. The kind people chase. Someone asked when. Someone else asked where. He checked his phone briefly, then smiled. "Tomorrow," he said. "A private meeting. Neutral location. Clean and discreet. Tomorrow." The timeline tightened everything. I felt the tension sharpen, not because I was nervous but because the moment was finally taking shape. The abstract praise was becoming real. The admiration was about to face context. A woman nearby leaned closer to me, lowering her voice. "That is a big deal," she said, eyes bright. "Being even loosely connected to something like that changes everything." I met her gaze calmly. "It does," I said. She smiled, unaware of how close she stood to the truth. Across the room he was already recalibrating, posture straighter, tone more deliberate. The golden confidence returned, reinforced by the promise of proximity to power. He glanced in my direction once briefly, as if checking whether I was still where he expected me to be. I was, but not in the way he thought. The anticipation thickened the air. Conversations circled the same topic, growing more specific with each pass. Logistics. Impressions. What to say. What not to say. The room buzzed with expectation, like everyone sensed they were standing near something important. No one realized they already were. I stayed quiet, not withdrawn, just observant. Every detail mattered now. The way he spoke about preparation. The way others deferred to his confidence. The way assumptions continued to stack without resistance. That was the danger of momentum. Once people believe a story, they stop checking its foundation. The confrontation was no longer hypothetical. It was scheduled, contained, directed. Everything pointed forward, toward a moment that would force clarity. I felt steady, not because I wanted what was coming, but because it was inevitable. The truth had been circling all night. Tomorrow would simply give it a place to land. As the room slowly relaxed again, satisfied with its plans, I understood something quietly decisive. They thought the next meeting would elevate him. They had no idea it was about to redefine everything. And when that door opened, there would be no space left for assumption. Only reality. The room fell quiet without anyone asking for it. It happened the moment I stepped forward, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. The attention shifted naturally, like a tide turning. Conversation stopped because something in my presence changed. The calm was no longer passive. It carried weight. He noticed first. His expression tightened just slightly, as if a thought had crossed his mind too late to catch. Confidence lingered in his posture, but it no longer looked effortless. It looked maintained, held together. Someone gestured toward the table where documents had been set out for the meeting. Another guest cleared their throat, clearly expecting him to take the lead. That was when I spoke. "Before this goes any further," I said evenly, "there is something that needs to be clear." My voice did not rise. It did not shake. It did not ask for permission. Every eye turned toward me. I stated my name first, calmly, the way people do when they are not introducing themselves, but confirming something that already exists. Then I explained my role. Not in long sentences. Not with explanation. Just facts placed carefully where they belonged. I watched recognition spread slowly. Confusion came first. Then disbelief. Then silence. He stared at me, searching for the punchline that never arrived. Someone laughed under their breath, unsure whether this was some kind of misstep. Another guest looked down at the papers, then back at me, eyes widening as details began to line up. I continued. I explained the ownership. I explained the decision-making authority. I explained the reason for the privacy. Each sentence was clean, measured, impossible to misinterpret. The power shift was immediate. The room felt different, like the lights had adjusted without anyone touching them. People straightened in their seats. Someone whispered my name again, this time with urgency instead of pity. He took a step back. Not physically far, but enough to be noticed. The certainty he had carried all evening drained from his face. This was not the reaction he planned for. This was not part of the script he wrote. "You knew," he said quietly, not accusing, not yet. Just stunned. "I always knew," I replied. That was all. I did not mention the invitation. I did not reference the comments. I did not point out the humiliation. There was no need. The truth did what truth always does when it arrives without emotion. It rearranged the room. Respect shifted direction. Attention followed it. Assumptions collapsed under their own weight. People looked at me differently now. Not impressed. Not intimidated. Aware. The kind of awareness that changes how someone speaks, how they listen, how they measure their words. I felt steady. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Clear. He stood frozen. caught between past certainty and present reality. Everything he built his confidence on tonight no longer held. The contrast he engineered had reversed completely, and there was nothing loud or cruel about it. This was not about proving anything. It was about alignment. Truth had entered the room without anger, without spectacle, and without apology. And once it did, there was no space left for the version of the story he believed he controlled. The power shift was complete, and it did not need applause to be real. Proof did not arrive with drama. It arrived with clarity. A folder was opened. A screen lit up. Names, signatures, dates, and decisions aligned in quiet succession. Nothing flashy. Nothing exaggerated. Just records doing what records are meant to do when truth needs structure. I did not rush. I pointed once, calmly, letting the information speak before I ever needed to. Ownership details. Authorization rights. Meeting confirmations. The timeline unfolded cleanly, removing doubt layer by layer. The room shifted again. This time it was not shock. It was understanding. People leaned closer, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. This was real. Not a reveal meant to embarrass anyone. Not a power move designed to dominate. Just reality asserting itself. He looked down at the documents, then back at me. "You are the final decision," he said quietly. "I always was," I replied. That was the moment the consequences settled in. Not punishment. Not humiliation. Alignment. The meeting he anticipated so confidently no longer belonged to him. The opportunity he spoke about with ease now carried conditions he could not ignore. People who had praised him moments earlier grew quiet, reassessing what they thought they understood. Respect does that. It repositions itself fast. A guest cleared their throat, careful now. Someone else adjusted their posture, suddenly aware of how words had been used earlier. Conversations did not stop, but they changed tone. Slower. More intentional. He said nothing for a long moment. I did not push. Consequences do not need pressure. They arrive naturally when the foundation underneath confidence changes. The narrative he controlled earlier had lost its grip, not because I challenged it loudly, but because it no longer matched reality. The irony was almost subtle. Everything he admired, everything he praised, everything he wanted proximity to, it had always been closer than he realized. I watched the realization move across his face, not with satisfaction, but with calm acknowledgement. This was not about winning. This was about accuracy, about seeing things as they are rather than as they are convenient. Someone finally spoke, attempting to smooth the moment. So the collaboration would move forward. Differently now? Yes, I said. It will. That single word carried weight. Differently meant standards. Differently meant values. Differently meant awareness. The room understood. No one argued. No one laughed. No one tried to save face. They did not need to. The consequence was not public embarrassment. It was recalibration. A quiet reminder that how people treat others when they believe there is no cost says more than any resume ever could. I closed the folder. Nothing more needed to be proven. Karma does not always arrive as loss. Sometimes it arrives as perspective. And once perspective changes, choices follow. He stood there, silent, finally aware that the night he designed to define me had instead defined him. Without insults. Without raised voices. Without spectacle. Just truth doing what it does best. Holding people accountable by revealing where they truly stand. The room did not return to how it was before. Could not. Conversations resumed slowly, cautiously, like people testing the ground after an unexpected shift. Laughter sounded different now, softer and less certain. Every interaction carried a trace of awareness that had not existed earlier in the night. People looked at me longer this time. Not with curiosity. Not with judgment. With recognition. Some avoided my eyes entirely, suddenly aware of their earlier tone. Others offered careful smiles, unsure whether acknowledgement was appropriate or overdue. A few nodded respectfully, brief and sincere, like they were recalibrating in real time. He remained where he was. Still. Quiet. Processing. The confidence that once wrapped around him so easily no longer sat right. It was not gone, but it had changed shape. The certainty had drained out of it, replaced by something closer to reflection. He had not lost face in a dramatic way. That would have been easier. What he lost was control of the narrative. I watched him take it in. The subtle shift in how people addressed him. The hesitation before speaking. The questions that were no longer automatic. It was not punishment. It was awareness settling where assumption once lived. That is what changes people. Someone approached me carefully, offering a comment about timing, about clarity, about how unexpected things can be. I listened, nodded, responded when necessary. Nothing more. Nothing less. I did not need to be loud. The truth had already done its work. What stayed with me most was the silence between moments. The pauses where people reconsidered what they almost said. The restraint where judgment once flowed easily. It was subtle, but it mattered. He finally met my eyes again. There was no anger there. No resentment. Just understanding layered with regret. He did not apologize. He did not explain. That was fine. Some realizations do not need words to be real. The emotional resolution was not dramatic. It was steady. I felt no rush of triumph. No sense of victory. Just calm. A grounded certainty that the version of myself who once needed validation no longer existed. I had outgrown that phase quietly, without announcement. The room continued to adjust around that reality. People adapt quickly when they understand where power actually sits. Not out of fear but out of respect. That respect felt different than applause. It was quieter. More honest. As the evening moved forward, I realized the story had already ended where it needed to. Not with confrontation. Not with revenge. But with understanding. They saw me now. And more importantly, I saw myself clearly enough to know that was enough. What surprised me most was not their reaction. It was my own. I had imagined this moment in smaller ways before. Quietly. Late at night. I thought there might be satisfaction in watching people feel exposed the way I once did. I thought justice would feel sharp, immediate, maybe even loud. It did not. What I felt instead was calm. Standing there, watching the room settle into its new understanding, I realized something important. Revenge requires you to stay emotionally tied to the moment that hurt you. Peace does not. Peace happens when you no longer need the outcome to validate you. I had already moved on long before that night. They were only just catching up. The truth had spoken without anger, and because of that, it carried weight. No one could dismiss it as bitterness. No one could twist it into drama. It existed exactly as it was, grounded and undeniable. That mattered. I understood then that power does not come from humiliating someone who tried to humiliate you. It comes from refusing to become the version of yourself they expected. The one who reacts. The one who explains. The one who begs to be seen correctly. I did none of that. I let clarity do the work. Peace is not passive. It is a decision. It is choosing not to drag the past into every future moment just to feel justified. It is understanding that closure does not require permission from the people who misunderstood you. It requires honesty with yourself. I did not need an apology to move forward. I did not need regret from anyone else to feel whole. The lesson was already complete. People reveal who they are when they believe there is nothing to lose. That knowledge stays with you long after the moment passes. And it teaches you something valuable. Choose distance over resentment. Choose clarity over chaos. Choose growth over proving a point. That night was never about revenge. It was about alignment. Aligning my life with who I had become, not who they remembered. Aligning my peace with truth, not reaction. Aligning my future with intention instead of old wounds. I left knowing one thing with certainty. When you stop living for someone else's understanding, you gain something far more powerful than validation. You gain freedom. And freedom, once chosen, is the quiet kind of victory that lasts.